and then I want to introduce our speakers. So as I said, I'm super glad to have Michael McKnight here with us all the way from New Jersey. I found Michael on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, and I am a collector of memes, and Michael posts a lot of memes in the daytime, and I get all fired up about some of the other little comments that he has with these things. And a few years ago, before COVID, we had a conversation about bringing Michael into Winnipeg with his often work partner and co-author, Laurie Deshotel, to talk about trauma-informed schools. And then, of course, COVID threw a big wrench in that. And so we're hoping that today kickstarts a little bit more of a conversation around that. But just to share with you Michael's bio that we put out, if you haven't seen it, he has worked for the New Jersey Department of Education in Cape May County for 17 years. And in those years, he served as a resource for school districts in the county, as well as throughout southern New Jersey. Beyond that work, in the Department of Ed, he's provided training to educators and parents, community members, and school leaders. And then prior to that, he had 24 years of experience working in schools as a special ed teacher for 14 years, learning with emotionally and behaviorally troubled adolescents. Michael's also worked as an administrator at Atlantic County Special Services School District for 10 years and was responsible for programming for troubled students aged 5 through 21 years. Removed from the local school district. Michael has a passion for creating and supporting reclaiming environments for at-risk children and youth, as well as adults who serve them. Currently provides professional development to practicing educators and is an adjunct professor or instructor at Stockton University, where he gets to teach and learn with future educators. And as I said, along with his colleague and friend, Dr. Laurie Deshotel, he is the author of 2 books. And I have those right here. Unwritten, The Story of a Living System About School Transformation, and The Eyes Are Never Quiet, Listening Beneath the Behaviors of Our Most Troubled Students. He's also about to launch his next book with Laurie, and I'll let Michael talk a little bit about that. And I just want us to welcome Michael McKnight, and I'll let you talk.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Joanne, and hello, everybody. Really nice to meet you. I had to do a little bit of research so that we can see where we all are. So I found you guys, and I'm right here in Cape May County, New Jersey. We're about 2 hours from Philadelphia and near the beach, actually, and I guess the closest city most people may have heard of is Atlantic City, which is about a half an hour away from here, and with all their casinos and all that stuff that I try to avoid at all costs, but it's there. So that's where I am, and so we're going to spend the next hour really taking a look at some of the work that is being done here as we move schools toward becoming more and more trauma responsive. So with that, let's begin. And I like to start with brains. Our work talks a lot about educational neuroscience and the brain and bodies of children. So the brain is a social organ. It's developed and changed in interactions with other brains. The organization of the developing brain occurs in the context of a relationship with another self, with another brain. Every time we have a contact with another brain, our brains change, and so do the person that we have contact with. They're constantly wiring and rewiring. The relationship context that we have with our young people's brains or our own children's can be growth facilitating or growth inhibiting. And so it imprints into the developing right brain either a resilience, hopefully, or a vulnerability. So I'd like to start with a big picture, quick look at the context we all live in and work in. And I love Nelson Mandela's quote here: there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. So I'm gonna kind of give a big picture, quick look at what that context looks like, both in the United States and in what I could find where you guys are. So we'll get started. Uh, every day in the United States, 5 children are killed by abuse or neglect. 8 children or teens commit suicide. Around 514 public school students are corporally punished in America every day. Our education system is run by each state. So in effect, we almost have 50 different ways to run our public systems. 19 states still allow paddling of children in our public schools. Many of those states are in the southern part of our country. And just to give you an idea about it, in 2019, over 90,000 children were paddled in American public schools. So again, that punitive nature is still well embedded in some places, even more than others, and that's still a pretty sad state of affairs in 2023. Other things going on: about 1,700 children are confirmed as abused or neglected every day in America. About 1,900 young people are arrested daily. About 2,900 high school students in America drop out of school every day. And over 14,000 of our students are suspended from our schools every day in the United States. When I did some research on where you are, Manitoba has the highest child poverty rate of any Canadian province. Off reserve, it's 53% of the families and young people. On reserve, around 65%. Winnipeg has the largest urban Indigenous population in Canada. Things you probably all know, but I needed to find out. In Canada, more than half the children in the child care system are Indigenous. About 10,000 children are in care in Manitoba. 90% of those children are Indigenous. And more than half the students suspended in the Winnipeg school division are Indigenous, even though less than 1/3 of the population is Indigenous. So we kind of begin to get a sense, big picture wise, of at least where we are. In the United States, children remain the poorest age group in America, with children of color and young children suffering the highest poverty levels. Nearly 1 in 6, more than 11.9 million kids were poor in America in 2018, and nearly 73% of poor children were children of color in America. Child poverty in Canada, when I was checking it out, in 2020, the poverty rates of children aged 0 to 5, about 9.1%, ages 6 to 10, about 8.5%. And for youth aged 11 to 17, about 7.9%. Were all less than half their levels of 2015. So your rate's actually gone a bit down. What I find interesting when I look at poverty rates is what it's like for the youngest students at the time of greatest brain development. And in both our countries, that's our poorest demographic with our youngest students. Mental health. Toxic levels of stress are certainly not just about other people's children. In 2015, about 3 million teens aged 12 to 17 have had at least one major depressive episode in the past year in the United States. More than 2 million report experiencing depression that impairs their daily function. About 30% of our girls and 20% of boys, totaling about 6.3 million teens, have an anxiety disorder, according to our National Institute of Mental Health. And we're seeing an awful lot more depression and anxiety in all our young people, and even seeing it at the university level. In October of 2021, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, along with the American Academy of Pediatrics and Children's Hospital Association, declared a national emergency for children and adolescent mental health in the United States. So again, that's kind of our picture of the levels of stress both our families are under, as well as our young people. Canada, youth mental health in Canada, an estimated 1.2 million children and youth in Canada are affected by a mental illness. yet less than 20% will receive appropriate treatment. In Manitoba, I found that the proportion of youth hospitalizations for mental health disorders increased from 17.1% in 2019 to 17.7% in 2020. Still a pretty significant percentage. Also in Manitoba, 40% of youth hospitalized for mental health disorders were from the lowest income neighborhoods. And when we start thinking about developmental trauma in young people and our children, what we're talking about is the soil they're growing up in. And I like to call it soil. Families in stress have children in stress, and stress over time becomes toxic. So as I go through these statistics, you get a sense of, what condition are our young people in both of our countries. I like to read this slide. Children are the most honest barometers of the health of our communities. Their disruptive behavior is a call to action to all of us, to tend to the broken links and suffering with compassion and some wisdom. As I look around, when we take a look at youth suicide in the United States, it's the leading. Here are the 3 leading causes of death in American youth, ages 15 to 19. First is accidents, second is homicides in America, and third is suicide. In Canada, suicide and self-harm is the leading cause of death for Indigenous Canadians up to the age of 44. So we kind of see that state of how are our kids able to navigate some of the areas that they're growing up in. Our child welfare systems. Many of America's child welfare systems are broken, and children can suffer serious harm as a result. On any given day in the United States, there are nearly 424,000 children in foster care. In 2019 alone, over 672,000 children in America spent time in foster care. In 2019, once again, we see the divide. 1/3 of children entering our foster care systems were young people of color. And in your system, as I was checking it out, child welfare in Canada, approximately 59,000 children and youth across Canada are living in permanent government care with foster families, extended family, or institutionalized settings. At least 300,000 more are living with vulnerable or unstable families and are a significant risk of abuse or neglect. So again, we get the sense of, the environment that soil many of our young people are trying to navigate and grow in. By now, I know the majority of both educators and mental health people, and just about everybody by now, has finally heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. The original study was completed way back in 1997, and I would say in the last 6 years, more and more people have finally heard about it after being around for quite some time. It takes about 20 years for many things to get into the context of what we know, and that was about right with the ACEs study. I want to share some of the work from Dr. Wendy Ellis, who has added to the ACEs study with her work on the pair of ACEs. The pair of ACEs depicts the interconnectedness of adverse community environments that some children's lives are rooted within, and the adverse childhood experiences that can be found in some environments. It's a double cocktail of both within the family and also outside of those homes. So some of the adverse community experiences that Dr. Ellis takes a look at would include food insecurity, housing instability, the high costs of rent and housing in certain areas, the high levels of poverty, community disruptions, violence, lack of employment in certain areas, or not very good employment, all adding again to to the level of stress inside families. That stress level is contagious, and young people growing in that carry that toxic level of stress into our schools on a daily basis. And there are some really significant results that come out of that. For instance, in the United States, unbuffered ACEs really start to affect school performances in all kinds of ways. Children with 3 or more ACEs are 5 times more likely to have attendance issues in school, 6 times more likely to have behavior problems and actually get labeled behavioral disordered and often put in our special education classes, and 3 times more likely to experience academic failure. And I would think that would be common with your Canadian children too. We know that ACEs can affect student learning and behavior in the classroom. What we do in our work is try to reframe young people's behaviors, and especially their problem behaviors in both our schools, our communities, and even in our homes. And the reframe that we call it, instead of calling these young people disturbed or a delinquent, we look at this as pain-based behavior, which is simply defined as behaviors anyone would see from a child in pain or anybody in pain. The behaviors that we deal with both in our communities and our schools from our toughest young people are when we dig a little bit under the surface of their surface behavior, what we find are living conditions that cause enormous levels of emotional pain. And we also now know that emotional pain lights up some of the same areas in the brain as physical pain. So we really want to take a look at some of our most difficult young people as really trying to navigate a world full of pain. Pain-based behavior looks like disrespect, disobedience, willfulness, moodiness, defiance, excessive anger, not being able to sit still or concentrate, and a whole host of behaviors that are usually punished in homes, communities, and schools. The central problem for adults working with children and youth demonstrating pain-based behavior is really our ability as adults with dealing with their primary pain without us inflicting secondary pain experiences through punitive or controlling reactions. Unaware and uninformed adults often treat pain-based behaviors with pain-based discipline. And as I continue, if you have any questions or thoughts about anything, feel free to throw them in the chat and we'll take care of them. Joanne will keep an eye on them, and if you need to interrupt me, please do. And if not, we'll take care of those at the end. But again, we're seeing the connection between kids in pain and how they are treated both in our schools and in our communities, and even into our juvenile justice facilities. Here's some examples. Here's an example from where I am in New Jersey of how pain-based behavior gets treated with pain in schools. In New Jersey public schools during the 2019-2020 school year, over 39,000 students received an in-school or out-of-school suspension. 39,000 kids. And we know often we have some repeat offenders in that giant pile of young people. Those 39,000 students missed over 108,000 school days that year. Treated with pain or removal. When we look at underneath those young people, often we see young people coming out of distressed areas, as well as young people carrying multiple ACEs in their lives. And yet we continue through our traditional systems to just continue to do what we've always done. It is nice. I mean, it's great that schools are finally beginning to hear of trauma informed care. But until we take a look at some of the things we do in school with young people and in our systems, we can't call ourselves trauma responsive. And often schools inadvertently, I hope, add to the stress and trauma in the lives of both parents and young people that we're trying to serve. Pain-based behaviors in Winnipeg, what I could find as I was digging around. Certainly your Indigenous students are significantly overrepresented in discipline data and suspension data, more often than any other ethnic group, a K to 12 in your largest school division. So it's interesting because in our schools, it's our Black and brown students, it's our minority students that are caught up in larger numbers than the rest of our students. So again, we see that tinge of race-based entering this as well. Winnebago School Division shows students who self-identify as Indigenous, a group that makes up around 27% of the population of 30,000 learners, have accounted for around 55% of the suspensions every year. So 27% of the kids in the district, 55% of the suspensions. So again, not uncommon, and we see many of the same things here with our most troubled young people. So we kind of have that in common too, and we really need to step back and take a look at that and say, who are these kids, and how do we begin to really work through some of what we need to do? What is the antidote, or what is our solution, or at least put us on a path of change? The other thing we know is stressed brains do not learn. Stressed brains have less access to the learning part of the brain, which is the cortex. And real quickly, the brain develops from the bottom to the top and from the inside out. And it's not fully mature until ages 25 to 30 years old. So none of us in our public school systems are teaching or working with a brain that's fully mature. Often women's brains mature a little faster than men's brains, if you can believe that. And yet we still see often that to do learning, the brain only thinks when it's regulated. We need to be in that cortex. On the graph, that prefrontal cortex on the left in green, that's where thinking is, that's where language is, that's where we do school, that's where we do life. And human brains really need to be regulated to open up that area to learning. So one of the things we typically do when we're working with schools, one of the things we do is really get them to identify their most challenging students by grade level. And Joanne, after a couple more seconds, I'm going to ask you to pull up video 1 for us. But in a typical school district, pre-K to age 12, if we accumulated all those hours, and children spend well over 17,000 hours of their lives in school. That's a lot of time. And what we want to do as we work with schools and move toward becoming trauma responsive is, after we identify some of our top tier young people, we want to set up connections with them and formally set up those connections so that we can begin to really create a relationship and connection with each and every one of the students in the building, but a little bit more extra time with those top tier kids. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to take a look at our first video.
Students need.
Whoops, start her over.
needs. And it is
What's that?
That's another check-in and check-out of somebody who had the perfect day, so we put it on the wall of fame. You gonna be the next one? Because we do check-in and check-out, students feel supported through a positive relationship every single day, which builds their capacity to be successful students.
I know you can do it. Okay.
At Fall Hamilton, we've really put a lot of effort in building positive relationships.
Hi.
How was your day?
One strategy we utilize is our check-in and check-out system, where adults are meeting with kids every single day, and it's not their classroom teacher. We have 41 students on check-in and check-out here. You're gonna do great, aren't you? And we identify the students that just need a little bit more support, where they're struggling meeting some of their requirements on an educational level, but more of a social and emotional level as well.
You did? I'm so proud of you.
The child knows every day they come in this building that somebody's excited to see them in the morning and excited to see them right before they leave.
Hey, Mariah.
Hi.
You ready to have another great day today?
Yup.
My check-in, check-out buddy, her name's Mariah, and she's in 4th grade. She has 3 goals every day that she works on. What are your goals for today?
Listen, be on task, and nice.
Awesome. She can get 0, 1, or 2 points for each of her goals.
The goal sheet is based off the student's needs, and it is agreed upon by the classroom teacher and the student. So whatever they're struggling with is what the goal is set around. Then every increment of the day, at the end of their literacy block, at the end of their mathematics block, at the end of recess, they're just getting feedback.
About being nice and you're nice to people around you. Good job. I agree, you were doing a great job.
Whoever the teacher is will give her points throughout the day. If she had a bad day, I try to just let her know that she still has the capability to do great tomorrow.
54.
But today was a really great day. You had a perfect day? She got a perfect score on her goals for the day.
What I like about check-in and check-out, that you get prizes and you get to see what you did good and what you did wrong, and you can do better next time.
We try to pick things that the kids like, school supplies, or non-tangible things like a positive phone call home to the parent congratulating them. It is a great day for Mariah, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about the points. The relationship and the accountability is really the important part.
How was your day?
Good. Actually, it was fantastic.
Fantastic.
Mr. Portel, he's our principal and my mentor. You go to him and then he asks about your day, and if you had a problem somewhere, we'll talk about that and see how you can fix it.
We've seen kids transforming their own opinions of themselves. Peyton, man, he had a rough year last year. Just to see his growth on a foundational level of being able to be in a class all day without incident and being able to start growing on his academics. So do you think you've knocked it out of the park?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm talking about. That's been a huge success.
You did it with me.
That's right, no, but you did it on your own. That's you, my man. Nice work.
Let's see. So as we're looking at that video, we kind of see a couple of things. First, you know, over 40 years of research on resiliency, in a nutshell, boils down to connection, to relationship, and one relationship certainly significantly can change the direction of people's lives. So that connection we kind of see being set up intentionally in the school. And there's all kinds of creative ways you can do it. You don't have to do it exactly like that. But the thinking is, we really want to set up those one-to-one connections. Just like these young people have just an extra pair of adult eyes to see how they're doing. to see what they're doing, to get them ready to come into school, to get them ready to come out of school. And it really doesn't take a whole heck of a lot of time. Why is that important? Well, what is trauma? What is developmental trauma? Well, trauma is a Greek word meaning wounded, and trauma is a chronic disruption in connection. So the answer is that connection. Trauma is an embodied experience. Trauma is what happens inside of you as a result of traumatic events. It moves us away from connection toward protection. So we want to dose those young people with those connections, not overdo it, but certainly all children we serve get doses of connection. We want to double dose some of our hardest young people who often can go through a whole school day with no one really even noticing them or only commenting on what they're doing wrong. Other things we now know about toxic stress and adversity is we know repeated and overwhelming stress sensitizes the brain's amygdala, and it becomes hyper alert to danger. Even when there's no external threat is present, these young people are in a persistent state of alarm. They're always in a fight, flight, freeze kind of area. And it doesn't take much, if anything, to often trigger their behaviors. And when they do, here's what we see in schools. We see, and it's important to note that trauma comes back as a reaction, not as a memory. So with these young people, we see emotional dysregulation, somatic dysregulation, attentional dysregulation, behavioral dysregulation, relational dysregulation, and even identity disturbances. And again, we see that dysregulation across the board with young people. Here's what it kind of even looks like graphed. You can see a healthy nervous system with its ups and downs during the day, and then symptoms of undischarged traumatic stress on the right. And what you see are kids at the top, they're stuck on. Those kids look and act like they have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They do not. High levels of anxiety, inability to relax, they're hypervigilant, they're easily emotionally flooded. These young people are easily angered, quick to rage, stuck on. Some kids get stuck on off, and we see things like a flat affect, pretty depressed looking, chronic fatigue, disconnection, disassociation, self-harming behaviors, and then kids that bounce back and forth between the two. But we really want to give teachers and educators and anybody that's working with young people in our school a sense of what it looks like behaviorally, because these behaviors often are treated with pain-based discipline in schools. So again, I don't want to bum everybody out today. I love Bell Hooks' quote, education is always a vocation rooted in hopefulness. So what are some of the things we're trying to do as we work with schools toward becoming more trauma responsive and not just trauma informed? Here on this slide is a representation of the path to becoming a trauma responsive school that I tried to put on one piece of paper, just to capture it on one page. When I work with schools, this is a full 2-day seminar designed to begin the journey. And I'm going to highlight some of that for the remaining time we have. But just on here, I want you to note a couple of things. First, there's a positive side up top and a negative side, a balanced system. But the chart starts at the bottom down in this area. And it starts with predictability, routine, structure, all things that are good for all kids, and they're great for kids and that are coming out of stressful homes or that carry in adversity and trauma. they need to be able to predict what's next. So we start really right there with that predictability, structure, routine. But then we also add some focused attention practices, some mindfulness practices, as well as teaching young people, even as young as preschool, a little bit about their brains and bodies, short doses, and teaching them about their brains and bodies, and also how to breathe to relax, and how to add movement, breath and movement, calm the nervous system, as well as focused attention practices that teachers can use to wake kids up when they're sleeping or tired. So it's kind of fun. It's not an extra program, and we weave it through. So I'm going to highlight some of the other things. The other note I want to make is this positive side. We start, if we go to the negative side, you can't go straight up then all negative. It's a balanced system. So if you find yourself on this side, you've got to move yourself back over on the positive side. And often what happens in schools with our most troubled kids is they kind of get captured in negative sanctions, or staying on most of the day spent in negative manner. And they never even access any of the positive stuff. So this allows that balance. It also allows us to create in school some co-regulation activities, teaching kids how to regulate, and not just jumping directly to our large backup systems in school. We talk about small, medium, and large, and a number of incentive systems to try to help balance what we're seeing in schools and classrooms all across, or really everywhere I go. So a couple of things as we talk to teachers, and give you at least a rough idea kind of what we're thinking about, is we ask teachers in schools, what are they creating? And really we want to think about defining the entrance of the school or classroom in a completely different way, as a door between two very different worlds. And really the big shift that we really work on is discipline as regulation issues. We really begin to try to change the dynamics of educators and even parents we work with. We're starting to take this work out into communities with parents. I've shared with religious organizations. So we're trying to move from the school outward too, as we work with schools. But what do we mean by regulation issues? Well, when a student becomes dysregulated, that's when they're having behavior problems. But rather than fuss, threaten, we learn to regulate them, just as you learned, if you're a parent, to regulate your baby when they were very young. It takes literally thousands and thousands and thousands of us regulating our children before they even can begin to regulate themselves. So here on some of the pictures, we see a teacher in the hallway regulating a child. This is down here on this left side is a vice principal regulating a young person in the hallway. And here down the bottom, we see a school security guard regulating a little one, kids in kindergarten. Could have easily picked that child up and taken him wherever he or she needed to go, but rather took some time to really co-regulate that child. And as we do that, we take that child from the emotional centers of their brain and begin to calm their brain and get them back up into that cortex, so that we can begin to have some conversations and fix whatever problem they're having.
Michael, I'm just
Children
wondering if I could interject, Michael. There's
Sure.
a couple of questions here that might fit with that
Okay.
particular slide about
Absolutely.
how you would address the unresolved trauma that comes up in the form of reactions for the staff that maybe have, a number of high ACEs or can't quite manage themselves to be that port in the storm.
Everything starts with the adult. You know, a dysregulated adult cannot regulate a child. So we've spent a lot of times with the adults that we work with on teaching them how to regulate themselves, and what areas they can do to take a look at. We'll share, you know, the ACEs stuff. We'll share some of that work. And we'll share what it does to nervous systems, to brains and bodies. But then we'll take also a look at how do you regulate yourselves? How do you do that? I'll talk with teachers about what kinds of processes can you put in place as you're driving to school in the morning before you go into school, to make the shift between a hectic morning, getting your own children or things together, rushing to school. There needs to be some time in the morning for you to just get yourself centered and ready. So we work with the adults too around being, we call it becoming a thermostat rather than a thermometer. And what practices can we teach you to keep yourselves calm? And it's impossible to do perfectly. The other thing we work on is really the idea of rupture and repair. We talk a lot about, you know, this isn't about being perfect, but if we make a mistake with a young person, if we overreact, if we get caught up into their emotional storms, once we settle down, we need to make the repair with that child. Or another adult that we got caught up with. And that's important, because it's not about being perfect, but it's really about working extremely hard to try to regulate ourselves, our classrooms, a group of young people, and with the administrators, the entire building. So we're talking about things like scheduling, about, you know, lighting in schools, about movement of students around, because we want to create what's the morning rush look like in your building, and how do we begin to slow that down, even for our staff and the young people, to make that transition into school so that we're regulated and ready to start. So we even play with school scheduling as we do some of this work. Good question, though. Let me go on. Went backwards. Oh, I think I'm going backwards. My fault. Sorry. So again, how do children learn emotional regulation? They borrow their caregivers' calm brains. And by the way, you know, we need emotional regulation for our entire lifespans. This doesn't go away ever. Think of the last time you had an upset, something happened emotionally, you were upset. Hopefully you had someone in your life that you could go to. And we regulate each other all the time. It's just almost a reframe of what we're doing. I like the term becoming a thermostat, not a thermometer. That takes a lot of practice. We spend time identifying our own buttons, what sets us off, what usually disturbs our equilibrium. If we can identify them, often we can pre-plan a strategy to use instead of reacting quickly. We know that a dysregulated adult can't regulate a child, so we even build in, hey, if you need a break to remove yourself from a classroom, let's set up a system where another adult can come in, watch your class for a little bit, go get a drink of water, get yourselves a little together, rather than just kind of continuing to be in that stressful environment. And I love this sign put up often in staff rooms. Am I co-escalating, or am I co-regulating? So a lot of different ways we work with staff, because it does start with the adults. We need to be regulated to regulate children. We also know that relational trauma is healed in relationship. Remember, the research has found that there's no such thing as a point of no return in kids' lives. No student is too hurt or too troubled to benefit from positive connections and supportive relationships. They actually need to be dosed more with opportunities to connect with caring, supportive, and attuned adults. And again, our goal, if we look at this slide, is to get the whole building, us and children, in this comfort zone. This is that hyper response. This is the hypo. This yellow zone, though, is where we want to be most of the time, and it is where learning occurs in schools. So we work hard with different processes to try to get the adults working with these young people to really understand how this works. There's a lot of pressure in schools to move to student test scores in the United States that's going on. A dysregulated brain won't learn until we get young people in this zone. We could be teaching the best lessons we ever taught. It won't stick. So we talk about those kind of things and that goal to really take a look at how that goes. Other things we talk about, it's the words we use, and I want to share some of those. We certainly know the tactics that don't work. These escalate kids and people. Nagging, scolding, yelling, all escalate behaviors. We like to think of turning that process around, and the magic ratio is really 5 positive words to every 1 negative. So if we can shoot for 5 to 1, research says it's almost the exact opposite, by the way. So we really want to turn some of our wording around. And to do that, we use the 3 R's. And I want to just give you a sample of what that language kind of sounds like. But again, the 3 R's are words we can learn to develop. So first, some reinforcing words. Your words really matter. So reinforcing words sound like this. Hey, I noticed the way you remembered to set up the correct heading for your lab report. Thank you. Hey, I noticed the way you remembered when to turn in your work so I can find it. I appreciate that. Hey, I noticed that you have new sneakers on. They're pretty cool. Or I noticed a new hairstyle, or I noticed a new notebook, or a new tattoo, or a new piercing. Noticing provides psychological air. And when I first learned about these words, I would carry a 3x5 card in my back pocket that said, I noticed blank, and just dose young people with what we're noticing in a positive way. It is fun to do. It keeps us more positive, and it focuses us on seeing some of the things that are in front of us that often we don't even comment on. Redirecting words instead of being so direct. Here's what they sound like. Hey, pencils are for writing, Lamar. I hear a lot of talking. This is your time to get your project together. I want to hear quiet voices. I hear conversations about TV shows. What do we need to be thinking about now? Redirecting words. I don't have to get angry. I don't have to get loud. We want to keep that sense of calm, relaxedness in our classrooms. And lastly, reminding words, which are always fun. Before we go to our next period, remind me what you will need to do. Or something like this. George, I see you walking around the room. Remind me of what we're supposed to be doing now. George is always walking around the room, but I could just yell back to George, what are you doing? Get in your seat. But these are much gentler words to really treat and model for young people high levels of dignity and respect. Getting close to the end, but I want to talk about now, this work is really not about feeling bad for children and lowering our expectations. That's the worst thing we could do for these kids. Research talks about the adults that do well in schools with these young people as warm demanders. They show personal regard for students, but they also hold high expectations. And it's the relationship, it's the connection that allows you to start demanding more from the kid, both academically and behaviorally. I like to think of it as high-level caregiver skills integrated with high-level warrior skills. Both are necessary to work with these young people. And lastly, every interaction is an intervention. And every time we connect, every time we notice, every time we say hi to a young person, it's actually an intervention. So the last video I want to show is what a backup system might look like on our chart. So Joanne, we're going to pull that up and we'll watch that, and then I'll take some questions.
Okay, Michael, I think you have to stop sharing your screen there.
Got it.
Got it.
First, I'm going to read a quote. To succeed, you must first improve. To improve, you must first practice. Young people have to be given space to grow and to feel like, okay, I made a mistake, but from this learning experience, I can continue to become better. To learn, you must first fail.
When you're talking about student discipline, a lot of times we are punitive because it's faster and restorative takes more time. But restorative practices are better long-term. So at Procone, we have a place called The Zone, which we use in lieu of suspension.
Welcome to The Zone.
It's a collaborative space where kids get into a circle and they discuss what their behaviors were and ways to correct it.
We have The Zone every morning from 7 to 9 a.m. Today, we had 8 students in The Zone. We're here today to talk about how to make things right when we make mistakes, poor choices. Usually the infractions are cell phone use, disrespect, cursing, but it could also be that there was an argument in a classroom or more aggressive behaviors that also get sent to us. So even though you had a conflict that brought you here, if we can bring our best selves to this circle, we can get a lot done, we can learn from each other. When students come in, we go over circle guidelines so that there are agreements that we hold within this space. What does it mean to listen from the heart?
You're trying to feel like you're relating to the situation.
Just like showing respect to them.
Once we teach them really what the zone is and how this is not a space where there's a power dynamic between you and another person, then they kind of disarm and we get to what's causing that behavior.
I had somebody come to me and tell me that a friend said something bad about me. Most of the time when you're in trouble, you get a referral and you have a consequence. They don't really want to hear your side of the story.
Well, what happened?
When you come into zones, they have a conversation with you and they kind of tell you how to solve your problem the positive way. I was able to go to her and work it out.
We're really just trying to get context. Whenever there's a conflict, right, both parties contribute to the conflict, right? Although you may not feel like you contributed to the problem, you played a piece in it. And that's a part of the social emotional learning that we're trying to get them to see. We really want to have a discussion about the things you can control.
I just need to catch myself and know my surroundings.
It is a place for students to process their role in it, understanding who is harmed, but then also understanding that it's okay to reflect on what you as a student needed in that situation.
I don't need anything from others to make it right because I can be mature on my own.
But how can we help you in the maturing process? Because we're going to be here too. What I usually say is I don't want to change your behavior. I want you to think about it before you do it. Really, I've seen them becoming very intentional about what they do, what they say.
Everybody has to own up to their consequences.
And that's the whole purpose of the zone.
By me owning it, it's going to help me better.
To succeed.
Good deal. Well, you know, that's kind of at least a little bit of a sample of some backup systems, way differently than probably what was done to us when we were in school. If God forbid one of our peers got themselves in trouble. But so I'm going to stop there and just kind of take some questions if anybody has any. Or
I'm just going to invite Roseanne if you want to unmute, because you did put a a really good question in the chat here, if you are comfortable saying it out loud.
Sure. I won't unvideo because I just finished eating and I'm pretty sure I have food in my teeth.
No worries.
Anyway, so Michael, I worked in the field of autism, and so behaviorism has kind of become a really sort of negative piece for me with the whole world of autism and behaviorism. So I often will hear things about points and I just kind of cringe. And so I'm curious though about your experience with that and what works, what you guys have seen work, how you use those positive reinforcements that are more like concrete as opposed to just language relationship reinforcements.
Yeah, when we're talking about incentive systems, I'm not a big fan of point systems either. And I agree with you. I think again, it's all external. It's me as the adult giving you this, and it's really trying to just teach kids to be obedient, which is really not the mission. I do use incentive systems where kids begin to check themselves. So you know, I'll use things, and not all the time, but I'll ask kids to check themselves on these parameters. Hey, did you complete your work? Did you have any issues with other people? How was your day? I'll let them rate themselves. And often I have them hand that in and I write notes back to them. A lot of times, actually, I find young people are harder on themselves than I am. And it starts to open up a back and forth dialogue way more than a point system given by adults. So even on that first video that we watched, they were using point systems in that school. I used the video not to say, hey, do what they're doing. But there's be creative. The idea, though, is to check in and to check out. So that's kind of how I feel. And Roseanne, I agree with you. I mean, I'm an old special ed teacher, and I think even in the field of the spectrum and autism spectrum with kids, we're starting to see a shift toward regulation in that field as well. But it has a long way to go.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I do like the checking in and checking out. And when I worked as an OT in the school system, we did promote exactly what you're saying, that noticing, finding joy in your kids, you know, and that kind of stuff. So thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, it is why we became educators with kids. We might as well have some fun, you know, and even Glasser way back had fun as one of the basic human needs. So I think, you know, one of the things I look for when I visit schools, and I'm always in schools, is anybody smiling here? Because that's a state, we smile when we're in that state of relaxed alertness, and often everybody's rushing around and doing this and doing that. We need to just kind of slow down a little bit and say, hey, you know, we're here as a group of people. Let's smile, let's have some fun while we're learning too.
Yeah.
I'm noticing the time, and I think Michael might be able to be persuaded to stick around for a couple of minutes. Some people may have to leave, but if there are other questions, feel free to unmute and ask, or if you have any comments. And I just want to put another plug in for these books that Michael has written, you know, both on Amazon, well thumbed through, my copies are, and full of resources and, you know, wonderful things for schools to have. I think my dream would be every school has a copy of those books in there and that people are using the material in them. I know you rely on a lot of things that Dr. Bruce Perry talks about, and he's somebody that we've had in Visit Winnipeg a number of times. We brought him in a few years ago, and, you know, it's exciting to see the more that this is being talked about, how we're reinterpreting trauma, you know, and Perry talks about the absence of the everyday necessary good. And one of the things that I always appreciated from you, Michael, is, that phrase pain-based behavior. A lot of times when we're triggered, we're looking at a child and thinking about what that kid is doing to me, rather than seeing that child as if they were choking on a piece of food right now. They'd be in pain and I'd have to jump into action. So, so to be able to reposition us to see them as in pain. And then the other takeaway for me today was dosing. I love that we are wonderful medicine in these relationships. We have a glib saying here in our network that a colleague of ours gave us a number of years back. The 3 R's is relationship, relationship, relationship. So thank you so much, all of you who joined us today. We'll hopefully see you again February 16th at lunch. Check out the podcast tab when we have today's broadcast up on there, and our regular podcasts that we're putting out monthly as well. And a very big thank you to you, Michael, for not having to fly into all the snow today, but to join us and give us some of your time. I know you're a very busy man.
Well, it was really great meeting everybody, and Joanne, I'm glad we finally got this together. And who knows, maybe we'll revisit sometime too and take a deeper look. But thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming, and enjoy the rest of your lunch.
Thank you so much.
See you later.
Bye, everybody.